Welcome to episode 5 of Meenal's World. I was so overwhelmed last week with all the emails and messages I received after my episode with Jaspreet Kaur, and I promised to get back to all of you because I really just want to thank you all personally for being a part of my journey and supporting me, especially after starting from scratch with Desi Outsiders. And this week I had Jaspreet on the show. She's also known as Behind The Netra and is best known for her poetry. She's performed all over the UK, and it was her TED Talk, How Poetry Saved My Life, is what caught my attention a few years ago. Since then, I've seen this lovely lady grow and fight for everything that she believes in, which has been a huge inspiration to my own work as well. She talks about how poetry saved her life as a teenager. We talk about how we both feel about cultural appropriation. There's one big black hole that we jumped into where we almost lost track of time. Jaspreet's knowledge and passion for our history and community is incredible, and she's currently working on her first book, which I'm sure will be another gem. So without further ado, it's a lovely Jaspreet. Welcome to the show, Jaspreet, and thank you for coming down today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really nice to see you, and I actually wanted to see you in person because I've always admired your hair.
Oh, thank you.
Now
It is real.
It is real, yeah.
That is actually one of the most common questions I get in a Q&A,
yeah,
or when I do online, like on Instagram questions or live Q&As. First question I get is your hair real?
Really?
What colour hair dye do you use? Who does your hair? I'm like, come on, guys. Yeah, but it's kind of a part of my look now, and I think it's a part of the whole Behind the Netra theme.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's become a part of my identity now. So yeah.
Yes, I read up on you a few years ago. I still remember I was in Czech Republic where I studied medicine, and I can't remember what exactly I was looking for, but I was looking for poetry or something along those lines, and your name came up on Google. So I've been following you for a long time since then. So it's so nice to have you finally face to face.
Thank you.
And hopefully we can talk about a lot of things, because I feel like we're both trying to send out the same sort of message to our community.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can get some good stuff today. So Jaspreet, you were raised in East London, is that right?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in East London, in Ilford, Redbridge, around those areas of East London, kind of on the border of Essex. And yeah, that's kind of where my journey started. My family used to own a corner shop, like many Indian families. So the kind of stereotypical story of having a corner shop. And the first couple of years we lived there on top of the shop, and had a really happy childhood, a very big family. So I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. My grandparents lived with me, and we had kind of quite a wide extended family as well. So I always used to have lots and lots of family around me. And then we moved out of the shop towards Redbridge and grew up there, which is quite a diverse area of East London. Lots of different ethnic minorities in that part of London, which has shaped a lot of who I am and shaped a lot of the inspirations behind my poetry and my journey. But yeah, I have now moved to West London. When I got married 2.5 years ago, decided to move to West London, which is very different. And my husband was born and raised in West London, so we kind of have this East-West rivalry going on.
But East London has changed quite a lot in the last couple of decades, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. It's nothing like what I used to remember it as. Certain pockets of it have become so gentrified and almost like super hipster now, when before those areas were really deprived. So yeah, there's a big shift happening. There's different minorities, ethnic minorities moving into certain pockets of East London. So the demographic of it's really changed.
Yeah.
But it's still got a lot of the parts of it that I love, like the grit, the busyness, the food, the smells, the sounds, everything about East London, I think reflects a lot of who I've now become today.
Because a few years ago, it sort of started to almost become cool to go to East London.
Yeah.
And show people around, like, this is East London.
Yeah. When I tell my dad about people wanting to visit Brick Lane or going to Shoreditch or those certain pockets, he's like, why are people going there? Who wants to go there for?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. It's now become like the cool place to hang out, and it's completely changed. But yeah, so I grew up in East London.
So Jaspreet, you talk about how you got into your poetry, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was from your early teenage years where you started to go into depression and anxiety, and poetry became your outlet. So before going into your poetry, I just wanted to discuss a bit more about your anxiety and depression, because 13 is a very young and tender age. It's an age where you still probably don't even understand your own emotions, the simple emotions like happiness and sadness and anxiety. So to feel that sort of feeling and not know what it means must have been very difficult. Because I look back at my teenage years and I think, did I ever go through something like that? And to be honest, my teenage years just seem a big blur.
It feels
I
that
don't
way.
know what exactly if I was feeling a certain way or not. So was there something that triggered those feelings, or was there something that happened at school or at home?
I think you're absolutely right. At that point, I never knew what was happening to me. I didn't know what anxiety attacks were. I hadn't put a label to it or understood what anxiety was. And at 13, you don't understand what depression is. You don't really understand the depth of what that means. But all I knew is that I felt scared a lot of the time. I was nervous a lot of the time. I was panicked. And this kind of low-level sad mood all the time. And there was a number of factors now, looking back on it, that I realise now as an adult impacted those emotions and made me feel that way. And it was a few things in my childhood that resurfaced. It was being bullied at school, a lack of self, a lack of identity, a lack of confidence. It was like a number of different things going on at that time as a teenager that really then all kind of encompassed into one big emotion that ended up making me feel really, really low. And it was only in my adult life that I've now really understood what a lot of that meant and why a lot of those things happened. And a lot of that came out in therapy and in talking therapy, and now I've started cognitive behaviour therapy, and a lot of that stuff has come out through those mental health services. But at the time I had no idea, and that was terrifying as a child.
Because I spoke to Isra last week, and one of the main issues I think I had at that age was that I didn't have a role model to look up to. And I think you probably had the same issue. We didn't have YouTube, Instagram, nothing. So we weren't aware that it's okay to feel like this, or it's okay to ask for help. So the idea of role models wasn't there for us. And I think if it was, I think we would have had a whole different life. I think it would have turned around completely.
I speak about role models quite a lot, especially for young South Asian women like ourselves. When we were that age, we didn't see anybody that looked like us. We didn't hear anybody that sounded like us. And I'm talking on kind of mainstream platforms, so on TV, in films, in politics, in media, even in literature, even in books. You would never see people that had similar stories to us. And you would have this white Eurocentric kind of domination of all literature and media and film that was seen as the mainstream and seen as the only story and the only narrative. So the only real role models in our lives were maybe the women in our family, maybe looking back in history and looking at Asian women in history, but in kind of our reality in our day-to-day life, that there wasn't those role models. So you never saw someone that maybe went through a tough time and went through struggles and then came out the other side, or anybody who was sharing those vulnerabilities about them and then how they've got through it. We didn't hear those stories. And especially within our families, even if women were struggling or having mental health problems, we know...
Just get on with it.
Yeah, you just get on with it.
And unfortunately, it's still the same now. A lot of women in our community still have that same mentality. Whether it's depression or whether it's a physical illness, you still have that same mentality. Just get on with it. I work in the emergency department in the hospital, and I see patients come in, young girls as well, who come in and say they've taken an overdose or they've tried to take their own life. And when I speak to them, I try to understand that why at that specific age, what can make you think so low about your life, especially in this day and age where I feel we're so exposed to things like you can do whatever you want in your life. You can achieve greatness. You can be the best person because we have Instagram, we've got social media. We see success stories so much now.
There's abundance of it.
There's abundance, exactly. Maybe too much. Maybe we're too saturated with all of that. To the extent that it might just flip the other way, where you think, well,
how do I navigate?
How do I even? Where's my starting point?
And I think that's a lot of the problem now for young people that I work with in schools, and then as my journey as a poet, when I'm working in schools doing workshops, that I've seen that for young people now, you're right, we're saturated with so many opportunities, but they're false opportunities. There's this perception that when they're looking online, they think, oh, I can achieve that. And they're looking at these celebrities that they look up to, and there's wealth being shown to them on a daily basis. But that's a filtered reality. That's not real life. And they then get pulled away from the stuff that really matters, about thinking about, okay, what am I passionate about? What do I want to pursue in life? What gives me a sense of purpose? Those aren't the questions that they're asking themselves. They want kind of instant gratification because social media is showing them that. And I can only imagine how hard that is for them now, growing up with that on a daily basis, on your phone, on every screen. You're seeing what they think is perfection when it's not. And I can really appreciate how hard that is for them. But I feel, I talk about this a lot, that these social media companies should be held accountable for what they're doing and what impact they're having on young people.
Because I feel like through each generation, the causes and the reasons of depression and anxiety have been very different. So if I look at my own mother or my aunt who in that generation, for example, I think maybe they were stressed and anxious because of family issues, because of being a woman in that time was quite difficult. And then for us, it sort of became an identity crisis. You know, we're British Asians. What does that mean? What does that mean? Who are we? What are we meant to do with our life? What's our purpose in life? What does my skin color mean to me? What does my religion mean to me? And now in this next generation that's coming, our kids, future generation, I think their crisis would be more about how to become successful like this. Because I've got Netflix, I've got Amazon, I've got Instagram. People just want the end point. And that, as you said, instant gratification is a big problem
for
nowadays.
it. And I think there is this culture of them wanting to be influencers, wanting to be creatives, and I definitely encourage that. I want them to be going into the arts and the creative scene. Obviously that's what we do and that's what I'm doing, but there is still a lot of hard work that goes into that. And
we should tell people what happened before we set this up.
Before our interview started, we had tech issues, we had stuff falling down, laptops not working. Like, there's so much behind the scenes that people do not see. And it's that whole iceberg analogy that you've probably seen a picture of, where people see the tip of the iceberg. They see this successful person that's out there doing all this amazing stuff. And I get that a lot. People see me online doing my shows, doing my talks, all those kind of exciting things, but they haven't seen what's in the background of all of that. This 4 to 5 years of me working day in, day out, trying to get to these kind of achievements and goals, as well as trying to just look after myself through all of that. And I think young people really do need to recognise that there is still a lot of hard work that goes into what they think is quite an easy profession, perhaps.
Do you see a lot of, as a school teacher, do you see a lot of kids who struggle with mental health problems, and do kids talk to you about it?
Absolutely, yeah. I guess I can say, like, I feel there has been an increase since I started teaching. I feel like, I'm not sure if it's because young people now understand how to verbalise it more, perhaps, because they understand the language around mental health, whereas perhaps before, most of society didn't know the terms to use or how to articulate it. But I do see a lot of young people, boys and girls, suffering from whether it's anxiety, depression, eating disorders. And there's a number of factors that impact each individual child. And there are services out there to support them, but again, perhaps their family don't know about it. Perhaps their family don't want to support them through that. Perhaps it's still being denied. And it's a scary place to navigate. But we as teachers and those working with young people do have a responsibility of care for these young people and making sure we are doing the best for them. But that's, I feel, kind of the result of the outcome. I want to do a lot of work as well before we get to that point, before those kids get to that point of feeling that depressed and anxious. What can we do way before that?
You want to prevent it.
We prevent it, What are we doing to help young people, making them feel more confident in themselves, moulding them into kind of happier young people? What can we be doing before we get to that point? So that's why I go into schools and I'm doing assemblies and workshops and all those sorts of things to share my story. And I'm so open and honest about it, even though it's sometimes quite a scary thing to do, because you're being so vulnerable. You're sharing your deepest, darkest secrets with sometimes absolute strangers. But I feel if that will help at least one person in that room from getting to that really low, dark point, then I feel I'm making an impact.
But just going back to what we were saying about instant gratification, I think it's something that sort of manifests in everything in our life nowadays. So if someone is going through depression or a difficult time, I feel sometimes as kids, young kids especially, want an instant solution. So it's sort of translated into a lot of things, a lot of different aspects of our life, and quite dangerous actually. Now that we think of, now that we're talking about it, I think that if you have someone who is depressed or anxious or going through some sort of really difficult time, you have to put in that effort to actually figure out what caused it and how to solve it. But some people just want that instant solving, and I see that a lot in hospital, where I see patients come in and they say, can I go home? And I say, no, we have to actually figure this out. I can't send you home without knowing what's going on. But again, it's going back to instant gratification, which is quite scary because it can be quite dangerous.
If you're trying to find a quick fix, and this is for young people and for adults, that if you're trying to find a quick solution, that can be detrimental. And I've seen that with any mental health problem, it's a journey, and there isn't an on-off switch. Especially with depression, people assume, oh, I'm just going to get better and it will switch off. But that's not how depression works. It's something that you may have to live with for a long time, but it's about managing it. And
so may I ask, is it something that you think that you still have to deal with at this age as well? That you still...
And I'd say I'm definitely at a really good point in my life where I'm very content. I found a sense of purpose in the work that I do. I have a really supportive family and network around me. But there are moments that I find certain days really tough. A lot of things resurface. Maybe something will trigger something quite traumatic for me, and then that day feels really, really difficult. So it's a journey, but it's a matter of figuring out, okay, how do I manage that when it comes to that point? Or if I am feeling anxious again, what methods have I taught myself over the years to work through that anxiety before it gets to the point of a full-blown anxiety attack? I've learned so much about myself and that process. So it's not an on-off switch. It will be something that you may have to live with for quite some time, but it does get better. This is something
I've never shared before actually, but I personally have, sometimes there are times where I have my own mental breakdowns. I'm driving to work, come back from work. It could be something at work that's triggered it. It could be a family issue. It could be anything. And as you said, that day can just go straight downhill straight away. And I know the best thing for me to do is to sort of stay away from everyone and just be in my own space. And because I know that if I do talk to someone, it could I could go into I could turn my personality to something that's not very pretty. So I try to just be by myself, and as you said, there are certain things that do trigger my anxiety, but that's because I've spent years trying to figure out how to ground myself. If there is someone listening right now who's also maybe 13 or who's young and is trying to solve their own issues, what would you suggest to them? And I'm asking this in a very broad sense, Jaspreet, because we live in the UK, where we're quite blessed with the NHS, and we do have a system in place where not even just the NHS, we can talk to our teachers, we can talk to our family, friends. People are a bit more open in talking about it.
Comparatively to other places in the world, absolutely.
And unfortunately, I have seen children in India, children I really care about and people I care about, but when I tell them to find help, they're like, well, I can't do that because it doesn't work in this country. So without resources, what is your suggestions to...
I think if you are in a position where you feel there are no services or resources that you can reach out to, or you feel they're inaccessible, because even here in the UK, we have a lot of mental health services, but sometimes they're not accessible for certain communities. How is a 60-year-old Asian woman with perhaps not the best English in the world meant to go to a white GP and describe what they're going through? There's certain barriers that are in place that doesn't help everybody. So there is, I guess, a number of different things that I suggest to people. For me personally, when I was at that point, when I felt like I couldn't access anything, I couldn't speak to my GP, I couldn't speak to my family, obviously poetry was my outlet. And poetry might not be for everybody, but the idea of releasing it in some sort of way, I felt really, really helped me. So whether that's writing it, whether that's singing, whether that's dance, whether that's some sort of creative outlet, I feel can be really, really powerful. And it's something I spoke about in my TED talk called How Poetry Saved My Life. And I spoke about how the Arts and Wellbeing Foundation did this research about how poetry and the creative arts can save the NHS about £200,000 a year by providing art therapy for people. And I think that's something you can do as an individual if that's something people want to consider. So that option is there. And there are amazing projects happening in communities now specifically for South Asians to turn to if they feel they can't access some of the other kind of medical or NHS services. There are now groups in our community that are trying to tackle the stigma, as well as having dialogue and therapy as well. So there's a group called Taraki that are specifically looking at mental health for young South Asian men. There's the South Asian Mental Health Forum. There's a lot now coming out specifically for our demographic if they feel they can't access other things. So I guess it's just a matter of looking out there to see what options are available for you. But there are things you could be doing as an individual for yourself as well. But my main message to people is do not bottle it in. Do not feel like you need to brush it under the carpet and hold it all in, because it will come out eventually at some point, and perhaps not in the healthiest way. So speak to someone or let it out in some sort of way, whether that's writing, whether that's music, whether that's art. Letting it out can be so, so powerful.
So Jaspreet, you talk about how as a young girl growing up in East London, you talk about how you were raised in a community which was quite white and a lot of British people around you. And you said that, were there times where you also felt uncomfortable in your skin as a young girl?
I guess, well, growing up in East London, which is quite a diverse area in the sense it's got a number of different ethnic minorities there, quite a large Asian demographic there. I guess when I was younger, I didn't think much about what my identity meant, what being a brown woman meant. And it was only when I started to get to later years in school, went to university, and definitely in the workplace, was when I first realised that, number one, I'm a woman and there's barriers to that. And I'm a woman of colour. So it's like you've got a second wall against you. And you've obviously heard terms like the glass ceiling, but for ethnic minority women, it's like a concrete ceiling. You can't even see past that ceiling. You don't know what's past that, because we haven't seen women like ourselves reach past that ceiling. And that's something I started to recognise when I was at university and then in the work world. And I think that's inspired a lot of my poetry and wanting to tackle these issues, because it's not okay. The fact that South Asian girls academically in school are the second smartest in the country, followed closely behind Chinese boys and girls, but that's not reflected in wider society. We don't see that in the mainstream. We don't see that in the work world. We're almost a muted community that's still not seen, or, well, we're seen, but we're not heard. And I guess my whole mission with Behind The Netra as a teacher, as a poet, as an activist, is really trying to tackle that all.
So did that frustration sort of ignite your passion about who you are and where you come from and what your identity means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I went through a period of time of just kind of anger and frustration and confusion. It may have added to my depression. It may have added to my anxiety when I was at uni, and didn't know what to do about it, didn't know who to speak to about it. And that's what actually triggered me to do a MA, a master's in gender studies. So I'd done my undergrad in history. I knew that I wanted to be a teacher. I knew I wanted to go into education. But I was like, you know what? I actually want to look more into the fact of, I love history, but this kind of feminism that was kind of growing for me as well, about what feminism is. And I decided to do a gender studies MA. And that's when, I guess, a whole new world opened for me academically, but also really personally for me, of understanding what it is like to be a woman in this world and then what it means to be a woman of colour in this world. So I kind of had this academic backing to a lot of these thoughts that I was having. I now understood, and from an academic lens, what oppressive structures are at play, whether it's patriarchy, whether it's race structures, what things behind all of these feelings is actually allowing this to happen. And how do we undo those structures? And some of those structures have been in play for thousands and thousands of years. So what do we do about that? And what can we do as individuals to help us navigate all of that? And that's something I then decided to express through the poetry. Because I realised that not everyone was going to read a 20,000 word paper. And not
hopefully they listen to a 1 hour podcast.
They might. I'm hoping they'll listen to a 1 hour podcast, because I feel these mediums are way more accessible. Even though I am writing a book and that's all happening too, but I felt like I had to look at these other avenues to make these messages more accessible. And I plucked up the courage to perform one of my poems. It was at an open mic night. It was a community event, actually, a poetry night in Hounslow in West London. I'm obviously from East London. I thought if I go all the way to West London and perform, no one knows me there. I don't know anybody in the audience. If it goes terribly wrong, I'll just come back home and never do it again. And that was the first time I performed a poem. And it went amazingly well. The audience and the reaction online afterwards was so significant that I thought, you know what, people are connecting to poetry, so let me just keep sharing it. And that was in 2015, that first performance, and I've carried on since.
And here you are now.
Here I
am. So Jaspreet, I just wanted to talk a bit about a topic that's, I think, been picking up my mind for a long time. And I think I'll probably find more answers to this as I speak to more people on the podcast and in more people in our community. You recently an episode was released with Apne Project with Rahul. He's a great guy doing amazing work as well. Hopefully have him on the podcast.
Yes,
but
definitely.
Might be a bit embarrassed with my setup compared to what he's got going on.
Yeah, he's got a lot of professional equipment happening, but
so there's one specific topic that you spoke about that was cultural appropriation. And a few days ago, I was at Omnom in Islington, North London. So it's called Enlightened Eating. That's the catchphrase of this restaurant. So I think it was started by a bunch of people from the ISKCON movement and the Hare Krishna movement.
Right.
So their deal is that every meal that you pay for, the same amount goes into charity for someone in a developing country.
Right.
So there was an evening of mantra meditation, and I think it was the performer was a member of the ISKCON movement, the Hare Krishna movement, and I think she was born into the movement herself. So she's a British citizen, and her parents were sort of went into the ISKCON movement, and then she was born into it. So she was sort of raised in the Watford Mandir and Hare Krishna movement. So she performed a night of kirtan and mantra meditation. Right. So I went there and I didn't know what to expect at all. I went with a very open mind just to see what it was like. Yeah. And she was chanting Om, and she performed a few kirtans as well. Now, obviously, it wasn't like what we have in our mandirs in India or even in the UK. It was very different. And one of the great things about what I saw on Friday was that she had a very westernized touch to it, in the sense that she was explaining what she was going to sing before.
In English?
In English, She said, okay, these are what these mantras mean, and this is why we say these certain things. And this is not something I've been exposed to in a mandir, because we just go in, sing our kirtan, bhajan, go home, and that's it. Yeah. And no one really has a chance to ask what's going on. So on Friday was a big realization for me. I was like, wow, this person who's not even born into our culture by blood or by genetics is telling me about my culture. So for a second I was a bit embarrassed. I was like,
I'm assuming she was white.
Yeah, she was white. So for a second I was like, okay, Milo, this is not good. You need to up your game. But then also for another second I was like, well, that's pretty amazing that someone who is not from our culture, who's born into it by default, I guess, has so much knowledge about the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita. And I thought that was really beautiful in itself. And So the whole Kirtan mantra meditation finished, and I was like on a high. I was like, oh, this is amazing. I loved it. I went with a friend of mine, and I turned around. I was like, so what did you think of this? She was like, no, why are her issue was, why are white people coming into our culture telling us about our religion and background. So we had a long discussion in the freezing cold outside, because I was like, you're not getting on the tube until we sort this out.
No, really.
But it was a very friendly argument.
And it's really important to have that dialogue with people in your life.
And we hugged it out and everything at the end. It was great.
And sometimes you'll agree to disagree, even with people that are really close to you. And it's important to have that dialogue though, and have that conversation. And I understand kind of both perspectives for that particular situation. I can understand your friend's perspective in the sense that there are times that in our community, in the South Asian community, even when somebody has come into that faith and they are white, they're put on a pedestal at times. But saying that, if that particular individual has really taken the time to fully understand that faith and what it means, and has educated themselves in the language, the scripture, the history, and has taken the time to do that, then that was their personal journey to do that. And if they are then sharing it publicly, I can understand that people are naturally going to connect to that. But I can understand both situations there, that you felt, wow, that she was explaining it in English, so you felt kind of more accessible to it. You felt that you could relate to it more. But I can understand your friend's perspective of like, why are we putting that on a pedestal? Yeah,
because we've been through our history, we've been oppressed by white people. And I got married in a Hare Krishna mandir myself in Spain. So I still remember the morning of my wedding. I walked into the mandir, and there was I think she was German. She was a devotee, very, very lovely lady. And she was explaining to me what I needed to, like the prayers. And I just looked at her, I was like, girl, I know what I'm doing. You know? But I mean, I was just joking around. I wasn't offended at all. But I think my friend's perspective was that we've been under this white oppression for so many centuries. And even still now, there are still times where we see it. And it's not like it's completely gone.
Oh no, it's still prevalent for our communities in so many different ways. And it's infiltrated our lives in ways that we can't even see. Like we have to unlearn so much behaviour because our psyche has been convinced that the white man and woman is more superior. And whether we recognise that or not, that is in our psyche. That's what we've been born into. That's how we've been raised. And it's now as an adult that I'm starting to think, you know what, there's certain behaviours I need to unlearn. Why is it that I used to behave in a certain way when I was around white people or in a room full of white people or in a meeting with white people? Why was I behaving in a way that I felt inferior, whether I knew it or not? So yeah, there is so many ways that oppression is still there today. And considering kind of political issues in the last couple of years, racism is on the rise. Whether it's on the rise or whether people feel they can be overtly racist is obviously a different debate. But we're facing this oppression still in 2020 in so many different ways.
I completely agree. But I think we live in a society where media has portrayed a lot of negative stuff a lot of the time. And my issue on Friday was where I was telling my friend, I was like, why don't we celebrate this? It's a moment of celebration because to some extent, Jaspreet, we have also invited white people into our culture. If we look at the Hare Krishna movement, Swami Prabhupada, who came in the 1960s to Europe to spread the word of Krishna, he invited people and said, come and join us, come and join our faith. And George Harrison, for example, was a big part of this movement. He donated lots of money to the movement, and he believed in everything that Prabhupada had told him. And he was a great asset, actually, to ISKCON. I think in the UK especially, he donated so much money. He built the entity itself, and the mandir itself has helped so many people. So when we talk about cultural appropriation, I think there's a fine line between cultural appropriation and appreciation, because what I felt on Friday was an appreciation from that person.
And I think faith is a very different lens to look at it from. Obviously in the Sikh community, we have people who are white, of skin colour, that have taken the journey of being a Sikh. And I think looking at it from a faith lens is very different. What my question is whether those people who are white and of that faith and have joined that faith, for example, do they recognize that they still have a position of privilege because of their colour? Can they walk on the road and feel safe because they are still white compared to a person of colour? And I think it's just a matter of that recognition and still realising that they do have a privilege because of their skin colour. But if they have adopted that faith and taken that way of life, then like that's great for them. And it's great if they want to be a part of that community. And obviously in the Sikh community, being a part of that Sangat is a beautiful thing. And that's not something I'm discouraging. But I feel like, do those particular people still recognise that because of their skin, they still have a position of privilege?
Because it kind of feels like they've walked into it without having to go through the history and all the oppression that we went through as our
pain
ancestors.
And atrocities and all of that. And it's important that they learn about all of that if they want to be a part of the faith as well. And I feel some people do that immensely.
Why you're here.
And, I guess that's what we all do. We're trying to teach each other about that. But there is something interesting that I heard recently, specifically for the Muslim community, more so, that for Muslim women, especially Muslim white women, who then decide to wear a headscarf, a hijab or a burqa or a niqab, how for them, even being a Muslim has become racialized, even though being a Muslim and obviously Islam is a faith, whether that community wants it to be or not, it has been racialized. So for a white woman to then wear a headscarf, she will then be seen as a Muslim, not a white woman anymore. And there's so many different kind of angles to look at this, and there's so many different forms of oppression going on that each of these communities have to deal with and figure out and navigate. So I think it's such a tricky topic, looking at it from a faith lens, looking at it from a cultural lens, looking at it from a race lens. You kind of have to do all those things to really understand
even from
this.
a fashion lens. Something like everyone is. So I was having this discussion with my husband yesterday because I was walking down London and I saw someone doing a Bollywood class, dance class. Now, there are a lot of people in our community who want to spread the joy of Bollywood and dancing, but the thing is, when they do a Bollywood class, they would tame it down so that white people can do it, white people can enjoy it. That bothers me sometimes. I'm like, well, you're not really doing the essence of Bollywood or Bhangra. That's kind of just whitening it up a bit so people can enjoy it. I understand that from a business point of view, that's what you have to do, and if you want people to come, that's what you have to do. So I think that sometimes we are also appropriating our own culture.
Oh yeah, we dilute it down to make it fashionable. We dilute it down to make more money. At the end of the day, if people are trying to make money out of it, they're treating it like a commodity. They have to think about who their audience is, who are their target. And if that demographic is partially white, they may have to change it to cater for them. And it's up to that person if they feel they want to do that. I'm not going to judge anybody who does. But for me personally, if my audience would be, I would want to consider that first. I'd think, okay, am I doing this for Asian women? Am I doing this for white women? Am I doing it for both?
And what's the purpose behind it?
And what is my purpose behind it? Absolutely. And that's what I, as an individual, assess first before I send out a message or before I send out a tweet, or even whilst I'm writing this book at the moment, I'm thinking, okay, who is my audience and what am I trying to do and achieve? So I think in that particular scenario, if they wanted to market it to not just South Asians, then they had to change it, right? So
as I said, it's a very broad topic, and there are things where I can spend hours talking about.
There's so many different.
There's no right or wrong, and this is I think that's the beauty of it. This discussion, that there's no sort of, it's more like a Venn diagram rather than a very straightforward thing.
It is that. That is definitely more. Because
we've also come. I feel like we as South Asians, we've come from India, from the east to the west, to have a better life, and so we've also kind of used the British culture to empower us in some sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
For example, your parents, my parents at least, when they came from India to Europe, they had to adapt to a few things because it made their life a bit easier, so they could settle in and subsequently give my brother and I a better life. Now when I go back to India, I see the westernized culture so ingrained into a lot of kids, where like, it's quite funny sometimes I go to India and my cousins are like, oh, let's go clubbing. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
You're allowed to do that now, I think.
It's interesting that conversation of in parts of the world that have been colonized, there's like this hyper westernization.
Yeah.
And it's coming back to that whole structure play, that whole hierarchy of who we see as more superior. And in parts of the world that have been colonized, they still feel that the white Western culture is still superior. So they want to reach that quickly. And that's why you might see in parts of India that girls are wearing very Western clothes and they are doing very Western activities, more so than maybe Asian girls are here. And then you're like, whoa, like how is that happening? I'm in England and that doesn't happen. But it's that whole process of what academics have called hyper westernization, that certain pockets that have been colonized want to reach that really, really fast, even if they have become independent from the British Empire.
Because I feel like when we go to India and we see this, then you come to the West and you see white people wearing saris or doing meditation and kirtans. It's like it's gone full circle. It's like they've lived that life of being very westernized and going out and having the fame and the money. And like, actually, it's not for me. And they just go back around to the same point where we actually came from. So if you go to ashrams in Delhi, especially, they're all full of rich white people. And that's the funny thing. So I always wonder if us as Indians, we're going into that hyper westernization mode, and if we will come back to who we are. Go back to who we are.
And I hope so. Like, I feel there is like a shift happening. I can see it here in the UK that our generation are now, like we said, we're reflecting on who are we, and that means we look back.
Why do you think our generation specifically, especially at this time, the last few years, I would say, a lot of us have gone into that mode where we trying to figure out our identity. Why do you think that's happened?
I guess obviously for kind of first generation, second generation migrants, our grandparents, our parents, when they first came here, like you mentioned before, they felt they had to assimilate. They had to perhaps hide parts of their culture, hide parts of their faith, maybe stayed in communities where there were other people similar to them, because it was a matter of safety. It was a matter of life and death for certain communities, that if you were overtly so much of that ethnic minority, you could be risking your life. My own granddad was ridiculed for being a Sikh in the early 60s. He worked at Ford Motor Car Company in Dagenham and was one of the only people of colour working there, and on a daily basis had to be ridiculed for who he was as a man of colour. And he did cut his gears, he cut his hair. And he talks, he's passed away 3 years ago, but when he did talk about it, it was such a painful moment for him to have to do that. But he had to do it, he felt, for his safety. And then later on in life, he then started to grow his hair again and all that sort of stuff. But I feel for that generation, they did have to assimilate. But now we're like, why should we? Why should we remove parts of our faith, our culture, who we are, to fit into this mould of society, when at the end of the day we're in such London obviously is a diverse pocket and the rest of England doesn't look like this, but why should we deny all those parts of who we are anymore? And I think that's what's happening with our generation. And you're right, it's only actually happened, I'd say, in the last 5 to 10 years maybe, because we are reflecting on that.
And it's happening obviously more to South Asians living in the West. I feel South Asians living in South Asia don't have that sort of spark to think about it, because they don't need to, right? Because they're living in their own community and everything is going great. But it's once they step out of it where they figure out, okay, why do I have this faith and why do I have this identity? But I feel like as South Asians living in the West and encouraging people to understand who they are, and not just understand, but also feel proud. Obviously, if they want to, we're not forcing. Not forcing anyone. If you want to feel proud, it's up to you. I feel like we need to we need to do that with people in India as well, because they've been raised in that community, so they're sort of just comfortable, like, yeah, this is who we are, this is what we do. But it's going back to what we were saying at the beginning of the podcast, where we have to encourage people to actually think about certain things, because I think, for example, my family in India, when there's marriages and weddings and ceremonies, they just go through the process because they have to. But I think we need to really encourage people to think about why are you doing this? Why are you fasting? Why are you putting mendi on your hands? Why are you wearing a bindi? Because that will encourage more people to feel more proud of who we are and represent us around the world a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we're thinking about certain parts of South Asia that are living in that way back home, there's certain communities that we have to think about, especially coming from the Punjabi Sikh community, that we are a minority group in India, have been significantly oppressed for decades, and we aren't able to kind of take hold of who we are in our own narrative, because essentially they're still in such an oppressive state out there. We need to reflect on the governments that are in those particular countries. What role do they still have to play on those certain communities? So yeah, I think for the Punjabi Sikh community, we're fighting for a lot.
Yeah.
There's still a lot that we're trying to fight for in sense of a homeland back there, but also here. Like, it's such a sense of loss and such a sense of confusion and pain because of the history that we've had. And a lot of it's a recent history. It's not very long ago. But yeah, I think for the South Asian community as a whole, it is important that we look at who we are and what makes us who we are. And if we are doing all these cultural things, actually thinking about, okay, why am I doing this? Or questioning things is okay. And having these dialogues and conversations like you did with your friend is really, really healthy and a really good thing to do, because that will help us grow. And that will make us more secure in who we are and understand our place in the world better.
I think to just boil it down to basics, I just think we just need to encourage people to talk and have these discussions, and not just take for granted, actually, because it's such a beautiful culture we come from. Our history is so vast.
So rich.
It's so rich and it's
ancient.
And so rich that other people want to be a part of it. Like I mentioned, these white people have come into India and want to be a part of it. So I think we just need to appreciate it a lot more from our perspective, living in the West and India as well. So just before we finish, because we're already
so much to talk about.
So yesterday I saw that, I'm sure a lot of people saw that you released some good news on Instagram. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, really exciting news that I was kind of holding in for a little while. But I was offered a writer-in-residency post with Birkbeck University. It's called the Ben Pimlott Writer-in-Residency, as a research fellow with Birkbeck University in their politics department. And it sounds all very fancy, but to break that down, it basically means that I will be working within the politics department at Birkbeck University, working on my own book. And I had been working on this concept for a book. It's a narrative nonfiction for quite some time, and it's for South Asian millennial women like ourselves. But I really just needed a space to write, an actual physical space, so an office or something along those lines to write. And then I was looking for mentorship or someone to kind of guide me whilst I write this book. So I was looking at different writer-in-residencies, and I applied for this particular one at Birkbeck, and two of the professors there, one being Sarah Childs, who's is an amazing professor in gender and politics, really resonated with what I was trying to do. And yeah, they accepted me on, which is really exciting. So it means that I'll be writing my book over this next year with the department, kind of mentoring me, guiding me a little bit, as well as kind of providing lectures and seminars and workshops through the year as well. So the bits that I'm researching, I can actually be delivering as lectures and workshops. And I'm definitely going to get you there. I'm definitely going to get as many Asian women there as possible to kind of see the process as well as the final book product that hopefully comes out.
When you started your entity when you started as a poet 4 or 5 years ago, did you ever see yourself in this position?
No.
Or did you have a vision that in 5 years this is what I would see myself doing?
If I look back at that person on that stage, on that first time I performed, I would have never imagined this is what it was going to be. It was going to become my life. And it has. It's become not only a career, because I find that word a bit there, but it has become my life, and it's become almost my life purpose. And in a way, the teaching and being a teacher as well as being a poet both had the same mission. They were both on a mission to inspire people, make positive social change, and really help those that were in a similar position to me growing up. And both the poetry and the teaching and working in education are both doing those things. And I'd always wanted to write a book. And there was kind of the fiction side of things that I'm obviously doing. There's the poetry, perhaps releasing a collection for that. But then this non-fiction idea, which is kind of looking at things from an academic but personal lens, was something I felt I'm ready to do right now. And it was kind of bubbling for the last year. And I had to take the scary step of taking a break from teaching. Which was terrifying, because being a teacher is something I've been doing for years. The routine is set. You know your daily life. You know what your year's going to look like. Everything's very structured. Then to going out into the world of being like, okay, I'm going to write this book, was terrifying. But I knew this was the point, that I'm ready now. And if I don't do it now, I don't know if it's going to happen later on. And I'm someone who does believe that everything happens for a reason at the time it's meant to happen. Obviously, I do belong to the Sikh faith, and I believe that Maharaj had a reason for why I was meant to do this now and not before. I'm glad I didn't rush things before. I'm glad I'm not waiting longer, because I feel I'm ready now.
Good.
So that's what I'll be doing over this next year, working this book. As well as still doing shows and performances and workshops and all of that as well.
Amazing. So Jaspreet, if people do want to follow you, how can they do that?
So you can find me online on Instagram, Twitter at Behind The Netra. So that's Netra. And then I also have my website, www.behindthenetra.com. And you can find a lot of my work on YouTube as well.
Which obviously took lots of hours of editing, as you said.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Jaspreet. I had a great... I mean, I could have gone on for much longer, but just for the sake of editing and listening purposes, I think we'll have to stop it here. But I'm sure we'll have a round two at some point.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm sure
2.0.
We'll cross paths again. So thank you for coming today, Jaspreet.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Jaspreet, for being a part of Meenal's world. As Jaspreet mentioned, you can find her on all social media platforms. She's also on YouTube, so don't forget to subscribe, and do also have a look at her website to see what she's up to. She's got a lovely newsletter that comes out every month, and you can always keep track of what she's doing and where she's performing. And on the note of subscribing, don't forget to subscribe to Meenal's World, and if you have a second, please do leave a review on iTunes. This will help us reach out to more people, and it would be great to share more of these amazing stories. So until next week, I'll see you with another episode. Bye for now.